Today, a federal indictment was unsealed, charging 15 defendants with conspiracy to impede or injure federal officers and other charges related to efforts of two Minneapolis-based ANTIFA groups that violently opposed the enforcement of federal law in our state.
So deranged leftists are once again back to violently rioting in Minneapolis, which really shouldn't surprise anyone given, first of all, this is Minneapolis. It's effectively a seasonal cycle there. And secondly, it is, of course, election year, which means that we've predicted you're likely going to see a resurgence of this so-called anti-ICE agitation as November draws closer. And that's exactly what took place today outside this Minneapolis courthouse. But quite ironically, however fittingly, these people are proving everything we've said about the inherently violent nature of the political left in America. Specifically today, what they are rioting over is the premise that they are not peaceful protesters, which is to say, basically, they're trying to prove to the so-called fascist Trump administration and all the evil right-wingers in ICE that actually we're peaceful protesters and you need to stop slandering us as violent rioters. And what they're, of course, doing to prove that point is engaging in a violent riot, which is to say, these people are completely proving what we have said about them, which is especially over in Minneapolis. That type of nonsense was never peaceful. Renee Good was not peaceful. Alex Preddy was not peaceful. There absolutely were and still are organized networks of violent domestic terrorism happening on those streets. And thank you for showing that to the world at the very protest where you're supposed to be peaceful, you absolute morons. And the reason I bring that up is because today it was announced that various different members of this very Antifa Minneapolis domestic terror network, the left-wing rioters from back in January, were indicted and arraigned today in a Minneapolis courthouse. And what did leftists do? They showed up to protest against them being indicted for causing and engaging in violence. And their form of protest was, of course, again, what, folks? Engaging in violence. You can't make that stuff up. And so hopefully this sets a strong precedent to, of course, be indicting a lot more people, because I would venture to guess while we have made progress, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend as if nobody's getting arrested because they're protesting over the fact that their people are actually getting arrested. Clearly, there's a lot more work that needs to be done. And hey, now you have a brand new names and faces to be putting to that, you absolute morons who tried to freaking storm a courthouse, which, by the way, is that also not the definition of insurrection? I was told that if a riot breaks out outside a government building and some people try to rush inside, that is the definition of trying to overthrow the government. So, something to keep in mind there. So we could call this January 6th. Anyways, let's get into it. We'll tell you about what went down. First, though, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. That is the best way to support our work, and it also ensures that you can stay up to date with all of the latest news and coverage. And that said, here is the big headline of today out of Minneapolis. And good news, because, very often we have this perception that the Trump administration is not doing anything when it comes to trying to prosecute violent leftists who are breaking the law and things like that. I think the truth is really more somewhere in the middle. Things take time. Indictments and charges, obviously evidence takes time to come and build up. And yes, there's a lot of systemic issues with our legal system, especially the judges, that make this stuff difficult. However, we are making some progress in this regard. And here's a prime example. So the DOJ today has just criminally charged 15 different leftists tied to Antifa and left-wing groups in Minnesota for conspiring. So these are conspiracy charges, which is very important as well, because I've said you basically need to RICO these people. This is what we've been saying ever since Charlie Kirk got assassinated. There are organized networks of this stuff, of this domestic terrorism going on. It's not cases of just isolated leftists all spontaneously showing up, exactly knowing the location of where ICE is and deciding to engage in obstruction and violence. No, clearly there's this kind of a paramilitary domestic terror force that the left is maintaining on our streets, especially in crazy places like Minneapolis and like Portland. And these people all need to be RICO'd. These people all need to be sent to jail. They are domestic terrorist communists actually trying to, I would argue, engage in insurrection against this country, and that's what needs to be done. So that includes Antifa Kyle. Some of you guys may remember we actually did a video on this character. He was the crazy guy with the face tats who recorded himself openly issuing threats and then got arrested for issuing those threats and tried to say he was a peaceful protester who broke the law, didn't break the law. You know, just an absolute joke. But here is some of that detail. So federal indictment was unsealed, charging 15 defendants with conspiracy to impede or injure federal officers and other charges related to the efforts of two Minneapolis-based Antifa groups, which, by the way, if you recall, that domestic terror designation has now actually helped the FBI go after left-wing extremism a lot because, believe it or not, I know this is a big shock to everybody, left-wing extremism was basically not even investigated or targeted or seen as a thing that the FBI even paid attention to for decades in the United States by now. And suddenly, for the first time, the fact that they're on a domestic terror watch list is changing that game. And ever since, hey, we have seen some of these indictments come down. So against those Antifa groups that violently oppose the enforcement of federal law in our state, the defendants are all members and associates of Direct Action Minnesota, which is, of course, one of the many Soros-style left-wing NGOs that are up to no good in organizing the supposedly organic grassroots protests, and you know how the whole thing goes. But take a listen for some of the key details.
We're not talking about peaceful protests anymore. We're not talking about having polite conversations anymore.
Today, a federal indictment was unsealed, charging 15 defendants with conspiracy to impede or injure federal officers and other charges related to efforts of two Minneapolis-based Antifa groups that violently opposed the enforcement of federal law in our state. The defendants are members and associates of Direct Action Minnesota. Today's charges and arrests reflect a broad federal effort to address organized, lawless behavior which seeks to disrupt the execution of federal law, endanger law enforcement, and importantly, endanger the very communities that these defendants falsely claim to be protecting.
So yeah, it's certainly nice to see that at least some of the violent leftists are facing the consequences of their own actions. The very people who celebrated the assassination of Charlie Kirk and called for it to happen to the rest of us. I have argued the concept of mainstreaming and celebrating political violence, so-called assassination culture, is extremely mainstream and prevalent on the left. But hey, maybe this could stand as the first step in beginning to make sure those people are not around in greater society, that of course meaning being in prison, so that way they cannot run around constantly and trying to hurt us and kill us, you know, pretty common sense stuff. Of course, though, if you're a leftist, what would be your contention? Well, I would argue the real left-wing contention, and what some of these people might even admit, for example, Antifa Kyle, the guy who actually got indicted, is that, well, they want to be able to commit violence against ICE. That's all there is to it. I mean, they support political violence. They want to liquidate the lives, we'll say, of ICE agents and anyone involved in the Trump administration. And this is a repeated pattern of behavior. We've been over it time and time again. Leftists are violent. Leftists nowadays, honestly, become more and more vocal about just outwardly supporting the violence too. I know some Democrat politicians will try to sit there and pretend as if their people are peace-loving hippies, but that's not the case. Arguably, it's never been the case, but especially in the past decade. I mean, let's be real about this, folks. But, okay, that'd be one thing. Let's pretend or try to take the left in good faith. What would be the good faith, not violent argument if we're to buy that is that, well, their contention against this is that people are wrongly being thrown in jail. Why? Because they're peaceful protesters, right? The Trump administration is wrongly throwing innocent, peaceful protesters in jail and blah, blah, blah. And they're constantly slandering us as violent when we're not. Okay, so if that theoretically is supposed to be the counter argument here, then you would think if you're throwing a left-wing counter protest outside of the courthouse, And the accusation is that your people, in a very systemic, organized way that you constantly did in Minnesota, but you want to claim is not, right? You want to claim you're peaceful, Antifa Kyle was peaceful, Renee Good was peaceful, Alex Preddy was peaceful. Okay. A basic non-starter ought to be your protest outside of the courthouse should actually be peaceful, right? Is that not the whole point you're trying to prove? That your people were peaceful and did not break the law? Would you think it'd be good to not violently riot or try to obstruct or impede law enforcement? Well, in the least surprising thing ever, guess what they do today? Show up to protest on behalf of peaceful Antifa Kyle by, of course, themselves being violent. Take a look at some of these scenes as the so-called protesters, aka violent left-wing rioters and domestic terrorists, attempt to violently storm the courthouse, get into shoving and pushing matches with federal agents, and just generally incite a riot in, by the way, again, folks, very typical left-wing fashion. Check it out. I mean, you just can't make that up, can you, folks? And I hope that you noticed what actually happened there. Because I'm sure what leftists are going to say, as they always do, is that they were just having a completely peaceful protest there, and ICE started tear gassing us and macing us for no reason, which if you cut the video in a certain way, I guess could kind of make it look like that. But no, you noticed before, what they're doing is, the federal agents, the security guards are trying to close the door to the courthouse. These guys keep shoving with them, trying to keep it open. They're, of course, swarming and blocking the entrance to a federal building, which is what they do in all of these cases, by the way. You wonder why you have those scenes where, they're tear gassing people. It's always because these guys will stand, for example, in the driveway, and we've shown these videos many times on the channel and pointed out, hey, that's exactly what just happened. They'll stand and block the driveway so that vehicles cannot enter or exit. The federal government tells them, you are blocking this. We need to have a vehicle come past right now. Please get out of the way. Get on the sidewalk. You're blocking. You're not supposed to be here. And then, of course, they refuse to do so. So law enforcement has no other option. They have to deploy tear gas to disperse the crowd. And then, of course, the protesters try to claim, oh, we were being peaceful and law-abiding and we got tear gas for no reason. No, that's not how it works. You're not allowed to just stand in the road like that. And the same is actually true, for example, for the entrance, let's say, of a federal building. No, you can't just stand and mob around that either. Not to mention, you see the shoving being done on the door, you see all the pushing and all that stuff. But hey, what else can we expect? This is literally what they always do, okay? They always show up to ICE facilities, or in this case, a federal courthouse, whatever, always freaking just being violent, because that is the nature, ladies and gentlemen, as we have said so often, of the political left. You could arguably say to an extent that when we're talking about grassroots so-called progressives or socialist, political violence and political agitation is basically central to their entire ideology. And that's what you saw happen on full display once again. And don't expect it to be stopping anytime soon as we get closer to the midterms. And much like they did, by the way, with Renee Good, with Alex Preddy, with the countless cases in which they got quote-unquote tear gassed, or at least that's what they tried to tell the world. Notice how in every single case it's basically staged, right? The people who said, oh, the Trump assassination attempts are staged. No, you know it's actually staged? Supposed instances of leftists being brutalized or attacked by law enforcement or the police, which, we've seen happen, let's say, in various different contexts more than once in a lot of different ways. But still, right? Because what happens here every single time? They are the ones acting out of line, being violent, blocking, obstructing, not listening to law enforcement. And let me point out, they're doing that on purpose. That's the whole point, because they want to be able to sell this narrative, this sort of like revolutionary LARP of theirs that, oh, they're the freedom fighters going up against this fascist regime, and look how they're brutalizing us. And it's like, the same thing with the civil rights movement, right? Oh, look, water cannons are being sprayed. We're peaceful protesters. Look how badly the system's treating us. But in reality, and if you really look to the history of this stuff, a lot of the same kind of behavior was true in the 1960s as well. It's all staged. Why? They're intentionally provoking, intentionally agitating, intentionally engaging in behavior that breaks the law, because they know that will naturally have to. It'll be forced to elicit a response from law enforcement. And then, basically like children who refuse to embrace the consequences of their own actions, when they get grounded or they get whatever they get, they try to say, oh, it wasn't me. Oh, they guilt trip you. Oh, how could you do this to me? They put the pouty face on is basically all that this is. Imagine that's what they're doing right now. They're clipping the videos of them being tear gassed. Can you believe the violent federal officers? No, we saw what you saw. It was you the entire time. And by the way, it always has been you. It's the same situation with Renee Good. They shot a peaceful protester. No, they didn't. You're talking about a crazy woman with her car. First of all, was blocking the road, literally trying to stop law enforcement agents from proceeding with their operations. And you're not allowed to block the road in general with the car, but especially, trying to block police on purpose, by the way, on purpose. Okay, so that's law breaking number one. Law breaking number two, she literally tries to flee from federal law enforcement, which you're not allowed to do, and then so happens to supposedly, quote unquote, run away by driving directly straight at an ICE agent. Okay, and then, what are they shot a random woman for no reason. That's why I say this stuff is being staged. Not that, oh, Renee Good was a fake person, just to be clear, or something like that, or that didn't happen. No, I'm saying that these lunatics intentionally get themselves into bad positions in order to create some type of martyrdom moment, and then when law enforcement are forced to respond in self-defense, this is exactly what they say. It was the same thing with with Alex Preddy, right? Hey, don't, first of all, carry a gun and then try to pick a fight with law enforcement, then resist arrest, and people find your gun or your gun goes off or whatever happened in that confusion, and, expect that to end well. That's just not a good idea. Well, the Second Amendment, though. Yes, any concealed carry person will tell you, you need to be extra careful around police, not extra loose, right? Not like, oh, I'm going to go fight and resist law enforcement, right? If they know you're carrying a gun and you do that, there's plenty of reason to suspect, oh, this could go really badly. Same thing with the freaking protests. Don't block driveways. Don't try to storm into federal courthouses. The definition of insurrection, according to you people too, by the way, if you don't want that stuff to be happening. But of course, that's not what it's about, right? They literally, this is actually a communist gaslighting tactic that goes back decades in America, which is that the supposed peaceful protests start a riot, get violent, and then when there's a response, when National Guard are called in or tear gas is deployed or whatever, the peaceful protesters got tear gassed, or in some cases they get shot or whatever it is. It's ridiculous. But hey, again, it's election season. That stuff is very powerful from a propaganda perspective. Look at what Alex Good and Renee Preddy, by the way, even did to public sentiment towards immigration enforcement, like it or not. And so expect more of this to continue, especially given the fact that Tim Walz and the Democrat Party don't condemn it. In fact, they encourage these people. What do you like even think back to the timeline of what happened there and how crazy that was. Let's think back about all of that, right? Democrats got busted for running a money laundering network with Somali criminals as a form of a political machine in Minnesota. ICE shows up to Minnesota due to the fact that we have like foreign criminals embezzling billions of dollars from the government. Tim Walz is like, oh shoot, this whole thing is really bad for me. So he intentionally incites his voter base to go sacrifice themselves and put themselves in very dangerous positions and encourages them to go and impede federal law enforcement. And in many cases, like Renee Good or Alex Preddy, try to do far worse to them. Okay, sacrifice the lives and safety of their own voters in order to cover up for their own criminal money laundering network. And in the end, who in the eyes of probably most Americans, just given how that whole thing was perceived. Who in the end was the bad guy for all of that? The Trump administration, ICE. That's what the conclusion of all of that was supposed to be. Oh yeah, Democrats got busted for embezzling your tax dollars and then tried to send their own voters to sacrifice themselves in order to distract people from that. And in the end, ICE, guys, maybe how many right wingers even said, guys, maybe ICE should calm down a little bit, right? I don't know. I like Trump even, but maybe this immigration stuff is going so far. You all fell for the psyop. These people, as you're seeing here once again, are violent communists who are trying to literally play those like mind and cultural games against you. But hey, that's what we got to be concerned about with these midterms, right? It's effective. I hate to break it to you, but yeah, nobody likes to see the images of, even if they're violent, but people don't know that, right? Of quote unquote protesters getting tear gassed or even getting shot, which are not things we want to happen, right? But that's also to an extent why these crazy lunatics try to incite those very situations, is because they know the propaganda value that it has. And they, to some extent, I guess, have a sense of reckless self-abandon, But anyways, nonetheless, there you have it. How poetic that the peaceful protest in support of the peaceful protesters is violent once again in typical left-wing fashion. Anyways, let me know your thoughts. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you were new, and until next time, God bless and peace.